And before we get started, please feel free to stop by 7 days a week. Monday through Saturday, we're open 9:30 to 5. And Sunday, we're open 1 o'clock till 5. So, over the past few months, I've been talking about a lot of prehistoric animals, and in the past few weeks, I've specifically gone over a lot of Ice Age mammals, animals that we have actually interacted with as a species. And today I wanted to talk about one that we've already gone over, but go over the practical aspects of if we had to deal with this animal today. And that animal is one that there is always that running scientific journal every year. Someone releases an article about we are 5 to 10 years away from resurrecting the mammoth. So we're going to go over mammoths and what would happen if we had mammoths again. And to do that, we have to go over what we call wildlife management, which is how we manage natural systems to work around us, with us, and in some cases, we have to work around them. So the definition of wildlife management is pretty direct. It is the practice of manipulating a wildlife system to achieve a desired goal. Minnesota, people out here should be pretty familiar with this. This is what the DNR does. They make sure that they're manipulating the habitat to be favorable towards deer and certain fish that you want to produce the amount so that you can have a hunting season. That's not what we're going to be doing for the mammoths, because we are going to actually try to come up with a rough plan. But there are 3 pillars of wildlife management that you need to understand and to involve to basically do good management. So you need to understand the habitat. This is going to be stuff where the indirect actions and supporting factors of what you're going for are going to interact. So this is how you modify what plants are in the area. Are you going to modify the terrain? What's the climate? Just understanding your habitat in general. There is the wildlife section, this is direct action. Like, are you going to have to cull a population? Are you going to try to enhance a population? Are you going to try to do a selective breeding program? Just understanding the specific animal you're managing. And then the human aspect of management, which is, this is public opinion and government legislation. And this is oftentimes described as the toughest part of wildlife management. And it's what we're going to deal with in this, because you bet when you put an elephant-sized animal on the continent of North America, people are going to have to suddenly change how they do things, potentially. And we're going to talk about the mammoth. So we're going to discuss what species of mammoth we're going to be managing, what are traits of that species, where are we going to put them initially, and then what could happen once they're introduced. What are the challenges going to be? What are the things you're going to have to take into account habitat-wise, public-wise, and generally with the mammoth themselves, because there are some things we do need to consider bringing an extinct animal back. In a world that they are currently 10,000 years out from existing, things have changed. So first thing, what species of mammoth are we going to manage? So oftentimes when people think of mammoths, you think of the woolly mammoth. It's the most famous one, but it's also probably not the one best suited for the modern world. We live in a much warmer climate, and that means there's less habitat suitable for this animal that we would have access to. You could probably release woolly mammoths out up in northern Siberia, but that could be a little bit difficult, and for this one we're going to try to keep it to the United States. So we're actually going to go for the Columbian mammoth. So this is a mammoth that was quite common in North America during the last Ice Age. They're a bit bigger, but they're also a little bit less hairy, and they can tolerate warmer weather better. So that's what we're going to be going for, a mammoth that can handle the modern North American climate. And they can still handle cold, too, which is good. And the reason this is important, knowing what species you're managing, is these 2 species of mammoth, as we just went over, have different habitat requirements. Woolly mammoth need colder winters, and they need more just cold temperatures. The Columbian mammoth can deal pretty much with stuff that the modern day elephant can deal with for heat. They are also, the diet's a little bit different in the types of grasses they eat, and this is one thing, these animals went extinct 10,000 years ago, and when Europeans colonized North America, they brought with them a lot of European grasses. And those changed a lot of North America. We don't have the same grasses we used to. The woolly mammoth probably will be able to digest some of these, but the Columbian mammoth also should be able to digest some of these. Probably a little bit better. So, we're going to now look at the mammoth. And what do they need? And it turns out that's kind of a lot. So for habitat, the specific type of habitat they need large open areas like elephants do today. They don't want a lot of hills and cliffs and steep terrain that's very dangerous for a large animal like an elephant or a mammoth. If they fall over, they can get severely injured. So they are going to be going for aspen parkland is what this type of habitat is typically described as. The next thing, these animals are going to need rocks to rub against. We don't often think about this, but elephants often rub against rocks in the wild to get stuff off of their skin. And we know that the Columbian mammoth did this as well, actually. We have rocks that still have marks from their tusks as well. Yeah, James, you want to... Here, hop on in here, man.
Oh, okay.
So we got a few people here, too.
I was just curious about what aspen parkland, like where in the U.S. that would be.
Actually,
like,
if you want to look that up, because we're going to talk about... That's going to come back in a factor when we talk about where we put these mammoths. So if you want to look that up really quick.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
So the next thing these mammoths do need is they need grasses and brush, minimal trees, but they need large, suitable water sources as well. Because these animals are going to drink a lot of water, and they need a lot of places to wallow. Much like modern-day elephants, they're going to spray mud and stuff on themselves to keep stuff off their skin. And again, the large water source is just for an animal that's going to consume a lot of water. Yeah?
I found where the aspen parkland is.
So where's that going to be?
In southeastern Manitoba and northwestern Minnesota.
All right, so one place that could be a good fit for the Columbian mammoth would actually, ironically, be up here. Now, we're going to talk about why, for the human dimensions, that might not be the best place to put them. But we do want to keep that in mind. So the next thing that these animals are going to need is a sizable population. They need enough individuals to maintain social herds and to sustain basically a self-sustaining population. You're not going to be able to release just like 20 of these and have them actually last any suitable amount of time.
I'm going to let you keep talking. I'm just going to draw up here.
So now is when we actually do have to pick. Where are we going to put these? And this is where sometimes we're going to have to probably modify a bit of habitat or use other suitable habitats. So one place that I have talked to with a few other people who were talking about this issue with me is what's going to happen when you introduce mammoths to a habitat? Does anyone have any guesses what happens the instant you put mammoths somewhere? What's going to happen with people?
They're probably going to conflict, right?
They're going to conflict, but what's the first thing? Let's say you release a bunch of mammoths. What's everyone going to want to do when they hear about these animals?
Probably going to see them, huh?
They might be poaching, but like James said, people want to see these things. You have to put them somewhere that's going to have the infrastructure to support a massive influx in tourism for people who want to see these animals.
They're all going to be in zoos and captivity and stuff.
The initial population of these probably will be in captivity, but for this exercise, we're releasing them into the wild, meaning if we're releasing them into the wild, we probably should release them in a protected area. And one of the best places that fits this criteria in the country is Yellowstone. It is a large park. It is also one that is well staffed and has the ability to deal with large amounts of tourists coming seasonally. So what we're probably going to do is use suitable habitat in Yellowstone, which has also a lot of flat areas with grassland. It may not be the perfect habitat, but it should be suitable for the mammoths initially.
So in terms of North America, and I think that, like you're saying, Yellowstone, just because of
the broad habitats,
and like ability, and then the fact that you could control or not control.
You can control the
people,
the interaction with people.
Yeah.
It's why you don't want to just release these out in the middle of nowhere, because if they're not on protected land or managed area, you can't control what the public is going to do. And even in Yellowstone, you'll notice they have issues with this. Everyone has seen the videos of people getting knocked over and thrown around by bison. People will mess with large wildlife. But in Yellowstone, it's a place where it's well monitored, so you're able to enforce punishments for when people do stupid things that they shouldn't. And you're able to, again, monitor the initial population of these animals very well.
So on what I drew up there is in terms of that perfect aspen parkland habitat that you were talking about.
And it's a little ways north of us, basically.
Right. It's interesting in America, that's like the one little chunk there that you were talking about.
And the reason is this habitat probably used to be more widespread. Keep in mind, during the last ice age, glaciers covered a lot of North America, so kind of shift a lot of climate stuff and like general locality climates south. So now here's the next thing. What are going to be the challenges once the mammoths are out in and about in the park? So we're going to think of the natural challenges first, which is how are these going to affect the other animals that they're around? This is suddenly a very large herbivore, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to be finding large sources of water. And what's going to happen is they're going to walk along those riverbanks. That could affect water quality, much like horses trampling riverbanks nowadays can impact it. These mammoths are going to change the aquatic habitat, the fish habitat. So for the people managing fisheries in Yellowstone, they're going to have to adjust. We may have to try to find ways to keep mammoths away from certain water systems to protect species of fish.
Is it in their crossing of the river and stuff?
It'd be possibly just going up to the riverbanks. That's what happens with horses a lot, is just that trampling the riverbank, muddying that up.
Making it, it's like erosion, like...
Yeah,
erosion.
mixing it up and stuff.
Yeah.
And then also going to the bathroom. You know, these elephants are going to urinate and defecate. That waste is going to potentially be in the river systems if they're not doing that up in the plains. So that could... And elephants are big, and mammoths are, you know, about that size. Columbian mammoths are actually bigger than African elephants today, meaning that they're going to produce a lot of waste. They're going to eat a lot. That's the other reason Yellowstone is good. Yellowstone can already support large herbivores. You'll notice we don't have a lot of moose up here. We don't have a lot of bison roaming around in Minnesota. So we need a place where these guys are going to have the bulk food available to them. So the next thing is they're probably going to disrupt a lot of other animals' behavior. You don't want to stick around at the river to drink when about 30 mammoths walk up and might not be willing to always share their habitat. As we see with elephants today, elephants often will kind of chase other animals away from water sources so they can get that exclusive ability to drink from them and not feel that they are disturbed or under a threat from another species of animal. So they're going to affect not just, you know, the other animals, specifically probably a lot of the herbivores are going to start avoiding water sources that they know the mammoths go to. The next thing is, obviously they can pose a danger to people in the park. We just talked about this, is you know there's going to be somebody who's going to go, I'm going to go get a picture with that mammoth and walk up to a bull mammoth, and that doesn't end well. That will not end well for somebody. Another one is, these are an animal that has just been resurrected from extinction in this hypothetical. Immediately poaching is going to be a problem. Someone's going to want a fresh mammoth tusk in their living room, or a big taxidermied head of it. So we're going to need very good protections legally and actually people out in the field guarding these animals, potentially. And the publicity of that could get a bit messy because, you know, we've all seen the pictures of the guys out in Africa guarding those rhinoceros, the armed guards. That might not play well with the American public, having that. It's something that we don't like to think of as something we have happening here. And then also just, you know, that enforced, you know, practice of don't go near the mammoths. People want pictures. People want to see them. They're not going to like being told, no, you have to leave them alone. You can look from a distance, but you have to leave them alone. Yeah. People don't like being told no about things.
In a way, designating an area where people just aren't even allowed in for them.
We need to make, and that's where we have to take into account what areas are the mammoths choosing to go, and we're going to need to designate some of those as areas where public cannot go. Because these animals will need space to themselves. But the other thing is, what if these animals aren't afraid of people? You know, these are being brought back from extinction, presumably with lab settings and stuff. They're probably going to be used to people to some degree, and they're going to pass down a lot of that to their children. Yeah. So one of the things we might have to do, well, it's called hazing. Hazing is when you basically instill a fear or a discomfort of being around people in a population of animals so they avoid us. And I looked into this. Hazing elephants is really hard. Really, the only way to haze elephants is to shoot something, and in this hypothetical, we don't want to shoot the mammoths because there's not a lot of them. So there's other ways to control where these animals go. So in the wild, elephants like to avoid bees because bee stings still hurt, especially when you get in the little soft areas like the ears and the tip of the trunk and the mouth. So potentially putting bees and strategically placing large beehives around Yellowstone could help deter the mammoths from going places. Another thing is planting a lot of spicy crops. Elephants don't like spicy foods. So if we can plant those around areas where we know they might graze near people, elephants aren't good at being very selectively eating. You know, they tend to grab a lot and just stuff it in their mouth. And when you mix in spicy food into that, they'll react to that, and they'll know that stuff doesn't taste good, and they'll avoid that. They'll prefer other food sources.
Start growing some ghost peppers around Yellowstone.
Yeah, we're gonna have to start. Yeah, some ghost peppers is a good idea. And the other thing is, typically with elephants, when they do graze around people, they often do this at night. So if you put large lights, well, it might ruin a bit of the ambiance of Yellowstone, which could cause a public problem of people going, "Oh, I used to be able to see, like, the night sky, but now we got these big floodlights out." That's still a great way to keep mammoths from grazing in at campsites, which could be a bit scary. So the other thing is, what we're going to need is careful monitoring. We're going to have to radio tag pretty much all of these animals and make sure we have regular and frequent, basically, surveys of the population. Make sure that they're breeding, make sure that the young are surviving to adulthood. These animals are what we call K-selected. They breed very slowly. The elephants are pregnant for almost 2 years. Mammoths would be around that same time. And they tend not to reproduce frequently. It's not every 2 years. It takes 2 years to birth the calf, and then it takes a few years to raise them. Which means that this population isn't going to be booming very quickly. This isn't a 10-year project. This is something you probably want to make a 20 or 30-year plan. Probably a 50 to 100-year plan, which is unheard of.
For a K-selected animal, it's a huge investment to have young.
Because they're
really want them to survive.
They're typically having one young too, so they're putting all their effort into that. And if that calf dies, they have to start from square one, which is pretty tough.
It's a huge waste of resources if that happens.
And they can't. And elephants and mammoths probably too had a breeding season, meaning they're not just breeding at all times of the year. So that mammoth, let's say that's not when the breeding season happens, that the calf dies. That's potentially almost an entire year of that calf not being replaced and growing up to replace any old members of the population who are dying of just old age. And then the other thing, we might want to do feeding patches where we enhance areas of food to encourage these animals to eat there, and we can put those away from the public. And that keeps these animals, again, out of direct interaction with the public. And then also, we need legal protections. We need to make sure that it is illegal to shoot these things, unless very specific circumstances like problem animals or maybe a very expensive raffle hunt.
Yeah.
Which might be a good way to get a lot of money in for, preserving the rest of them. And then just having the protected areas like the parks being where we initially set these, because again, easier to work there than it is out if we had these things walking through Minneapolis. So then what are some of the benefits? Because oftentimes we think of this hypothetical as one that is just purely fantasy. Mammoths in particular are a big one where there's a lot of habitat in the world where they could be put, and elephants are known to increase carbon sequestration in plants, given what they do to their habitats, because elephants and mammoths were ecosystem shapers. They are animals that shape the habitat around them.
They eat so much. And
they're ecosystem engineers. Elephants knock over trees quite a bit in the wild, and they'll knock over smaller trees, which allows the bigger trees to grow and keep getting bigger without having to compete with these smaller trees. And they can sequester more and more carbon. The grasses they eat also help with that. The other thing for mammoths is that it's likely that they cleared away snow in winter to get at grass, allowing, essentially, snow would act as insulation for the ground in the winter, meaning that it's actually not going to freeze as thoroughly. But with mammoths scraping away with their tusks snow to get at grass, it actually allows more, basically, permafrost formation in the soil, which can help trap carbon and other greenhouse gases. So these animals could theoretically help us at least start to mitigate and slow down climate change in some way. So there is actually a tangible reason, potentially, to introduce a mammoth or mammoth-like animal into ecosystems around the world. It could help us, theoretically, if we want to get our act together on climate change.
What was it that primarily extincted
Mammoths? It was a mix of climate change and us.
So hunting plus habitat.
Hunting plus a habitat shift is never a great combination. It happened, like we've gone over with the Ice Age animals, a lot of them happen to be, well, my habitat's changing, and these, hairless upright apes are shooting me with arrows all the time. That's not a great combination if you want your species to survive, especially for a lot of these K-selected species. So another thing is these animals aren't going to stay contained to parks. eventually when their population gets big enough, they are going to expand their range. And that's where the legal protections outside of parks need to be good. But it's also going to change probably a lot of insurance. Is anyone in the audience, if you're on the live stream, are you insured for an elephant if it, flips your car? Please comment if you are, because I want to know which insurance plan that is. I can't afford it, but I definitely want to look into it at some point. But the other thing is that we're going to need wildlife corridors for these animals. And wildlife corridors are really good for making sure animals can move from place to place, so their habitat, even if it's fragmented, is still connected. And the thing with mammoths, much like elephants, they're going to cross vast distances.
Yeah.
They can cross hundreds and hundreds of miles in their lifetime.
So you're going to need a super long corridor.
You're going to need a long corridor, and you might have to make seasonal things where, hey, this road is blocked off. Why? Mammoths are using it. And just again, these animals are going to impact us. Nobody's going to like when these start going through their garden. No one likes their flower garden getting ripped up by an elephant, basically, in the middle of the night. Nobody, again, also, so there is a phenomenon in elephants called musth, which is when male elephants get flooded with testosterone, adrenaline, and other hormones and become incredibly aggressive. Mammoths probably experienced this as well. It's about 1 to 2 months of the year that they are in this state where they are incredibly dangerous. That is going to cause some human interaction, and we may have to take action against problem mammoths. Some of these animals may have to get put down because they might be going after people or cars or buildings in just that blind sort of rage moment. But that's the thing, we're going to have to figure out ways of probably federal organizations who are built around basically compensating people financially for damages. And then just education. We need to educate people on these animals because that is going to make sure people understand them. And the more you get people involved and educated on a subject, the more favorable they're going to view what you do, especially as a manager. You often probably have heard the phrase, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. As a wildlife manager, that is not at all the case. You make sure people understand what's going to happen and are at least tacitly okay with it, or understand your reasoning before you take an action. Because if something goes bad after the fact, and they already knew it could have, they're kind of emotionally and mentally prepared. Or they will understand, hey, that was bound to happen at some point. But if you don't tell them what you're doing, if this happens out of nowhere, if a mammoth just knocks over someone's, shed, and they didn't think that was possibly going to happen, and you didn't inform them this is a risk of having mammoths, they're going to be pretty frustrated. They're going to be mad about that. They're going to ask you, why do we have these things? Get rid of them.
Yeah.
Again, these are large animals, and the first thing with a lot of large wildlife, the public typically wants to get rid of them. And these animals are going to interact with farmers, too, specifically. Farmers have nice fields of grass. And I don't think a lot of chain link or barbed wire fences are really suitable to stand up to an elephant. So these animals are going to be knocking down a lot of fences. And people are going to have to build sturdier fences for their property, for their pasture. Otherwise, mammoths are going to be, 1, letting their cattle out, and 2, eating all the grass that there's for their cattle.
You have to be digging trenches or something.
Yeah, so trenches is, like James just mentioned, a really good way to keep elephants out of places if you have the means to do it. You can dig a wide enough trench where the elephant can't get its back.
Over it or...
They can't step over it, but they also can only get their front feet into it, so they can't just step across to the other side.
And they just have to back out.
Yeah, and they have to back out, and they can't get to it. And then you want to put your crops a suitable distance away from the trench so they can't just reach with the trunk, because that defeats the purpose. And again, these animals having a trunk, understanding their anatomy and biology and how they'll use it is a great way, because you need to realize these animals have a lot of reach. But yeah, no, they're incredible animals, though. And again, this could potentially help get publicity for parks to get more, funds from the public and the government. There are benefits to this, but it would be a huge challenge. And again, this is a pure hypothetical. I personally am not in favor of this. I don't think we should try this. It has so many things that can go wrong. It could really damage an ecosystem that we're currently still managing and trying to sort of get balanced generally with North America. We don't always do the best job handling this continent. And it's a continent that has been heavily affected by humans to the point where we're still reconstructing habitats all the time.
Yeah. Is this even something that you think could just be like genetically possible?
Oh
Like,
no,
I've
we theoretically could make mammoths again pretty easy.
heard of gestating them in elephants and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
they're close relatives to Asian elephants, and they could theoretically gestate an embryo. The other thing is they could always do the old-fashioned method of genetically engineering and just selectively breed hairier elephants with longer tusks.
Yeah.
You could always put that out there, but that doesn't play as well with the crowd, I think, as the Jurassic Park method of let's just straight up genetically reconstruct it.
Well, and my question is, how do you make a mammoth fetus? You know what I mean?
We do have DNA.
We have DNA, but it's like, so would you have to? You would have to break them down. So you'd have to take some somatic cell that we have,
Yeah.
and then you'd have to revert that to a stem cell, and then you would have to turn that into
a usable.
what do they call those again? Gamete.
Yeah, but
and then you'd have to combine that with like an elephant egg.
Yeah, and it's complicated. And the thing is, though, mammoths are the animal we always go to with this because, well, we have a lot of their DNA, and we have a lot of mammoth laying around. It's very common that we have found quite a few permafrost frozen mammoths. You know, the full animal.
Maybe you could find some eggs. I don't know.
Well, we can actually. We have adult female mammoths. We probably will have an adult male mammoth at some point. I think we have a calf, a male calf. But the thing is, we have a lot of biological material that's still usable.
Is there any reason other than just chance that we have more females than males?
I think it probably is just chance, and females make up a higher portion of the population for elephants and for proboscideans in general.
I just wonder if there was maybe some behavioral difference between males and females.
Well, it's the social structure. The females make up a lot more because it's easier to live longer when you have a group, and the males don't live in groups that much for elephants, and mammoths were probably the same. But then there's other stuff with this, which is, what does this exercise tell us about management and stuff? And one of the things it tells us is, management is hard.
Yeah.
It is a very difficult job, and I do not envy a lot of the people currently out in the field, because right now we have the growing area of human dimensions where you have to deal with the public more, and a lot of times as a manager, you really just want to say, let me do my job, get out of my face, get out of my area, I'll tell you what's going on with it later. But the thing is, that isn't a transparent process. Oftentimes putting that barrier up can make management a lot more difficult because the public is going to put up resistance every step of the way and go, well, why aren't you telling us what's going on? Because, keep in mind, for wildlife, in America, in our country, wildlife is treated as a public trust. So every deer out there, regardless if the deer is on your land, your neighbor's land, or nobody's land, it is something that every citizen has a right to. That is a public resource that the government of states and the federal government manages for us, but ultimately we technically own that resource. We need to have it usable, available in some way. And in America, it's the democratization of that resource is everyone has to equally have the opportunity or availability to use it. You can't have stuff where like, oh, you gotta have like X amount of money to do this. No, everyone's supposed to have the same theoretical rights to going out and enjoying the wilderness. And then also these animals would probably start crossing into Canada. So this is the other thing. It's an international resource. We would have to work with other agencies in other countries to do this management right. We might do more wildlife management live streams in the future, by the way, using some of the other animals from the Ice Age we've gone over. And we're probably going to carry this hypothetical forward where if we have the mammoths, what are other animals we might have to add? What are other animals we might need to help engineer an ecosystem suitable for these and these other animals? Anyone actually, here's one. Can any of you behind the camera and laptop think of another issue that might happen if we have mammoths walking around? Especially in Yellowstone. Because what's already an animal that's kind of a problem in Yellowstone?
Bears?
Bears. What do we have in case of bears getting into campgrounds? What do we do with bears in campgrounds with food and stuff? What do we have?
You have the trash cans that humans are too stupid to use.
Yeah, you have the bear boxes and the bear-proof trash cans. Really quick, does anyone know if there's an elephant-proof box or elephant-proof trash can?
I mean, they're a lot smarter than most animals, so they'd probably be able to get into it.
What's the quote is, the reason we don't have bear-proof anything is because there's an unfortunate and considerable overlap between the smartest bears and the dumbest people. And there will be a sizable overlap between the smartest mammoths and the dumbest people as well.
Probably a even much larger gap.
Yeah, so that means we're going to have to come up with ways of making sure this is easy. And also, I think my wildlife professor has a great saying for this. Keep it simple, stupid. It's the KISS method. We're going to have to not get super elaborate with this, which is the temptation is to get, oh, let's make sure we get all this right. You got to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid. If it's too elaborate, it's going to be tough to pull off. And we're going to probably go into more detail on the actual management process in future videos. This is just a general one just to give you a sense of the scale of any management thing, especially when you're working on megafauna and large animals. And just keep in mind that with mammoths and elephants, people manage elephants in other parts of the world. This is not something where it's like, oh, they're impossible to manage, they're unmanageable. People do this today. It's just very difficult and requires different sets of skills and practices. And each animal presents its own unique challenges. In general, though, this has just been more of an informal one. And just in case anyone missed the mammoth live stream, I did bring out a couple things for the mammoths. Like we got a tooth, we got a tusk fragment, and we got a little model of a mammoth, what a woolly mammoth might have looked like. But yeah, in general, we've got a small little section of an exhibit where we got a lot of our mammoth stuff out. If anyone wants to come in and actually talk about this specific subject of how we would manage them, feel free to come on in because it's really unique. It's a unique challenge for North American management, and it's one that's kind of fun to think about. Sometimes thinking about something that's not really having to be done can be a little bit more fun as a thought exercise than having to come up with how are we going to manage for bison? That's a practical problem we still have to this day. And it can be a little bit freeing to think about an imaginary problem than have to deal with the real world ones at times. But yeah, so like I said, Headwaters Science Center, we're open 7 days a week, 9:30 to 5, Monday through Saturday, 1 to 5 on Sunday. And again,